All right, happy Christmas Eve. Christmas Eve is my favorite day of the year. Hence the red sweater, green scrunchie. I'm feeling festive. And although I'm very happy about this weekend, I also want to film my most disappointing / DNF books of the year. We're going to have 5 DNFs that we're going to talk about. We're going to have 5 worst books at varying degrees of worstness for me. And there are books that could have usually made it on this list when I normally put it together, but I'm doing a series I'm no longer continuing in video next week, and I didn't want to overlap them. So there's some books that will be on that list. But on a whole, this year wasn't too bad for me. I did do my reflection video to try and figure out why did this reading year feel so mid, feel so average, and that's the thing. It just felt so okay. So there weren't actually that many this was horrendous, I hated this, honestly. That like I said, I only have 5 to talk about that elicited anything close to strong emotions. And per usual, I don't think you're a bad person if you like these books. They're books, it's art. We all have different opinions on art. And if you don't want a negativity video, I have 3 positive videos. I have my favorite short stories, I have my favorite fantasy, and my favorite sci-fi already live on the channel. You can check that out in my end of the year playlist. So with that preamble out of the way, we're going to start with the DNFs, then get into the worst books. So most of these DNFs aren't too big a deal. Like this first one, this is more of a life thing. So Man-Made Monsters, I wanted to read in November. It's a YA horror short story collection. And the project of it seems really cool. I did read the first, I want to say 40 pages of it. So 4 stories, I think. Some were longer, some were only a couple pages. And I'm really intrigued by the project, but I was so slumpy in November. And I don't actually know when I will put this back onto my TBR, because even though I like the idea and I want to see where it goes, and I've been told by a lot of people that it does really pick up, in general, not a lot of the stories were really standing out to me. There wasn't something in the writing style that is something, I don't know how to describe it, but something that I really am drawn to for short story collections, even though it does have a cohesive theme and it kind of follows this generation of family. It's interesting. I really like the project of it. But it was not working with Slumpy Brain, and I don't know when I might pick it up again. So that's why it's a DNF. I guess all DNFs could be on a pause pile, but this is I don't actually physically have plans right now. And I feel like pause, I have plans, if that makes sense. Although I don't really utilize the pause function like a lot of other people do. Another one that was just it's a not for me, and I don't have strong negative feelings toward it, and that is A Taste of Gold and Iron. This is a fantasy romance that came out this year, and a lot of people who like A Strange and Stubborn Endurance, a book I really love this year, really like this one. But that wasn't the case for me, and I think it just comes down to when you read a romance book, you have to care about the characters and the character interaction, and I gave this 100 pages, and I know it's slow burn, but truly. At that point, I barely even liked the characters as individuals. And with A Strange and Stubborn Endurance, it does actually take them 70 or 80 pages for our love interests to meet. But I was still engaged there because I was really invested in one of our main characters and a friendship that we got to see on page. And here, there's good anxiety representation. I don't think they're not well fleshed out. I just didn't care about them. And in a romance, I don't want to work that hard. And I was working really hard. And that's the thing. It's if I'm picking up a romance, no, that's not the book I want to challenge myself with. I have other books for that. I just want to have fun, be swept away, even if it's slow burn, because I do like really slow burn things. I just have to care about the characters to take the time on the journey with them. So that was just kind of a miss for me. And it's also an economics political plot, and that's literally anti-buzzwords for Angela, and it wasn't showing me that this would be the version of that trope that would, subvert the rule for me. So those two don't really have negative thoughts towards the books. Reclaim the Stars was a short story anthology I read earlier this year. And I never really talked about it on the channel because I usually just wait till I had finished it, and I didn't really keep reading. I don't know. Basically, this is a bunch of young adult long form authors writing young adult short stories. And I don't read a lot of young adult short stories, so I don't really know what the average version of that looks like. I read a lot of adult, I've read some middle grade, and I like both of them for the different projects that they are. Whether it's because these authors typically write long form and are just dabbling in short form, or if it's because young adult short stories just typically have a different arc that I don't really vibe with. I read the sci-fi section and got into the fantasy contemporary, and I just didn't care anymore. None of the stories were gripping me, even by authors that I really like their long-form stuff. I read the Anna Marie McLemore story, I read the Mark Ashiru story, and I was just I would rather read a book by them, if that makes sense. So I just put it down, and I never really talked about it. So for me, it doesn't really meet what I want from a short story experience. But that said, I like the idea of it, the project of it, a bunch of short stories written by Latinx authors for a YA audience. That sounds great. It just didn't really work for me and my tastes. The next two, I did DNF because I had negative opinions. And the first one is The Justice of Kings. I really wanted to like this book. I gave this like 50%. I read like 200 some pages of this book, and I was just like, I'm going to practice some self-care. I'm going to put this down. I'm not going to keep reading it. And the issue for me with this one was like twofold. One, there was just a disconnect between how this author writes and my brain. It's not bad writing. It's just that like consistently, especially with like exposition and descriptions, I would read a sentence and be like, what does that sentence mean? Like, and I don't know if part of it, I think he's a British author, so I don't know if part of it's just like, I'm not used to that syntax that he was using that would be like really normal if I was from the UK or something like that. I have no clue, but I consistently had to reread sentences for like dumb stuff like describing balconies, like, which is not fun. I don't enjoy that. And that's definitely more of a me disconnect. But then also, it was kind of like a murder mystery, low magic fantasy book, which is not my thing. It's not my thing. And then our narrator, our main character, who's like reflecting back on her youth, was just kind of dumb. And like, that's fine. Like, she wasn't a bad character per se. I just was like, I was confused about why she made decisions she did. Like, I think she was trying to convey how impulsive she was in her youth. But, like, even then, I was just like, well, when I was impulsive, I at least had reasons that made sense to me. Like, even if they feel impulsive to someone outside of that scope, at least the internal character needed to make it make sense. And I don't even think she did that for herself. I don't know. So I didn't really like following her. And then I didn't have any of my tropes. And then I was struggling with the writing. And the themes are, I mean, great themes about justice and government and who serves the people and who can, get away with things like that. That's interesting, but not like my bread and butter. So I put it down, because I wasn't going to love it, and, I didn't want to force myself to read something I wasn't loving. Similarly, this one, I might have more negative feelings towards, even though I only read 8 pages, and that's The First Binding. I really wanted to like this book. I asked for a physical arc. I thought it was going to be one of my favorite reads of the year. I saw it was a chonky 800-page, like, South Asian Silk Road travel fantasy. I was ready. And then I read it, and then I was like, yeah, no, not for me. And it's not because I don't like Name of the Wind. It's comped to Name of the Wind a lot. I like Name of the Wind. I don't talk about it a lot here because I read it like in 2014, like years before I even knew BookTube was a thing, and I'm not rereading it until maybe one day we get a third book, because I'll just reread it then. That's not my issue here. My issue was there was something in the writing style and in the voice of our main character that I knew if I finished it, I would have a raging 1-star rant review, if that makes sense. And I knew very early on that that's what was going to happen for a couple of reasons. One, I don't typically edit or critique books while I read them. I normally accept a book for the project that it is and go with it. But when I am bored or when I am being really frustrated, I can tell that I should stop, because I will start being like, why are we repeating this? Why is this here? Why, what is the focus? Like, I was doing that all the time. And then we got to a scene where he's at a bar and he's talking to a barkeep, and he's like, I wonder why he's using this old rag. He has all these clean rags behind him. There has to be a story there. There's always a story. I'm not even really parsing. That's almost verbatim what this scene is. And then the barkeep's like grunting, he's like, oh, I bet it's about a woman. It's always a woman. It's like shit like that. It was just like, oh no, I'm going to have a horrible time. And then I watched some reviews for my recent release roundup, and it seemed like the things that I disliked just from the first intro were going to just get worse for me. And I can handle an arrogant main character sometimes. Like, it's okay to have an arrogant, unlikable main character, but I don't think that was the intention. I think I was meant to actually like him, but I wasn't going to. Like, I wasn't. I was going to actively hate him. And although I love the theme of storytelling and loving stories, this was too much. Like, already 8 pages in, I'm like, no, sometimes a rag's just a rag. I can tell you right now, the kitchen that I have right now with the rags in it, that they were the ones that were clean today that I have washed. Like, it doesn't always have a story. So yeah, I DNF'd that because I wasn't going to have a good time. Like, I just wasn't. So those are the DNFs. And now we'll get into the 5 worst books. And I don't really know where to start with this. I will just start with the one I read earliest in the year and get to present day. I don't really know if there's sort of an order. It actually will naturally end with my worst book of the year if I do it this way. But there's no true ranking to this. So, House of Sky and Breath. I read Sarah J. Maas for escapism. That is what I do. She writes certain archetypes of characters that are predictable for me and are comfortable, and I know that I'm going to get certain tropes done in a way that I like by this author. That is not what happened in this book, because she actively chose to use tropes that I don't like that she uses. Looking at you, Bryce, and the decisions you have made. And also, we forgot that this had a romance component and just made it like physical chemistry component, which is not invalid, but it's not why I'm with Sarah J. Maas. Like, I don't read the romances because she writes like impeccable sex scenes, because she doesn't. Like, I read them for the pining and for the build-up, and that wasn't here at all. And also the romance itself, like, everything we had built in the first book, which I still really like, I give that first book like 4.5 stars, is just like gone. Mainly because we bring in archetype stuff for Bryce that I dislike from Throne of Glass, and I'm just like, but why? And then the plot makes no sense. I don't know why anyone who read this book was like, oh yes, this should be 600 plus pages. Of course. No. Not for at least the plot that's in these pages. And then the ending's just such a typical Sarah J. Maas ending that for me at that point I was so frustrated I couldn't even like enjoy that. And there's a lot of stuff that people who are mega fans or had a better time with this book are really excited about that I am questioning whether she can pull it off. We'll see. If I can be proven wrong, that'd be great. But I don't think she writes distinct enough characters for her to pull off what she's trying to do next. And I'll just be that vague in case you somehow haven't heard of what happens at the end, House of Sky and Breath. But to me, it wasn't actually a big reveal because, like, I had been picking up on the signs in other books she had written. I just never knew she would do anything with it. So yeah, that was pretty disappointing because it came out when my mental health was trash, and I was like, good, she's perfect where my mental health is trash. And it was just not great. And also, like, we didn't need that many alpha perspectives. Like, give me like 2, not 5. Like, goodness. All right, next one is Crossroads of Twilight by Robert Jordan. This is the worst book in Wheel of Time for me. I think definitively I can say that. I have 2 books left to read, but I can't imagine any of them being worse than Crossroads of Twilight. And I think part of my issue is, like, I have liked slog books more than most people. Like, I like Winter's Heart. I like what we accomplished in Winter's Heart. I was impressed that we did that. And then Crossroads of Twilight is basically catching up every other character to the events of Winter's Heart, but in a really boring way, where actually, though, no one's character arcs move a measurable amount, at least not 800 pages worth of an amount, we can say. Like, I'm sure I'm forgetting some small things where maybe something happens to move a chess piece a certain way, but not 800 pages worth. And then on top of it just being a whole shit ton of nothing, we have like a transphobic thing that I'm just like, but why? And like, I know it's the 2000s, but it was like bathroom transphobic stuff. Because in this series, there's a lot of dark friends, and they're hidden, they're secret, and you like get perspectives of this like unnamed person. You're like, they're in the camp. Oh my gosh, there's like a dark friend here. And like, you're supposed to like try and figure it out. And like, if you are a fan and you've read this throughout the years, there are cool forums and you can try and unpack and predict who's who and all of that. And this had a clue for people that, like, if you've been paying attention, you kind of already knew who this person is. And there's like a person who like looks like a woman but can use the male power, which is really weird, and the kind of commentary on transness and how that would work with this magic system. And basically other people feel nervous around this person who's a woman when they're in the bathroom with them. And like, I was just like, guys, for why? So that was just like the icing on the cake of like a really, really overwritten, mediocre book that didn't do much. And like, I have such a low bar for the slog books. Like, truly, like, it doesn't. So that was pretty bad. I do think you can skip that one and just read a synopsis unless you like really love it. Like, truly, I don't really know what happens in that book. Like, I can't remember, and I have a pretty good memory about books and what happens in them. Like, I really do, and this one just like completely out of my brain except for that like one scene. All right, next up is Burnt Sugar. So this one's definitely more of a this was not for me type thing than like anger inducing. Read this for book club, and it was shortlisted for the Booker, and I'll leave down below Katie's review on this because he really likes this book. And a lot of people really like the writing style and the themes that this explores. I actively have some issues with writing style choices for this debut, and I found the themes really personally exhausting and took away from my enjoyment. So this is about a very dysfunctional mother-daughter relationship, and there's some caregiving discussion, there's discussion about fallibility of memory, and how she chooses to connect memory to the story quite often, literally speaking, is with smell. And normally I like when authors use smell because I'm not a visual reader, so I kind of like that inclusion. There were some descriptions and similes of smells that I'm like, smells like what? That I was just like, ma'am, no. So, and that jarred me from the story. Like, I remember voxering my friend Evie, who also really liked this, and just being like, what is this sentence? Like, what? Like, and that happened to me pretty consistently. And then I was just exhausted because this relationship was so fraught, and then the ending's kind of this weird open ending, and I don't know, I just think I wasn't really connecting with a lot of the themes, and it was like only a 230-page book that felt really long. Like, I'm okay with a meandery literary book, but this just wasn't the one for me, I guess. And it just like, I just had some active issues with some of the stuff, even though I wouldn't say it's like the worst of the ones on this list. The next one's another sci-fi, or is this the first sci-fi? This is the first sci-fi. The Genesis of Misery by Neon Young. I feel torn about this. I will link to positive reviews below. Judith at Dead Good Book Reviews and Bethany at Beautifully Bookish Bethany both really like this. And I think both have really interesting perspectives on it. I come to this work with a very secular background. I was raised Unitarian Universalist, so I do know tangentially a lot about a lot of different religions, but I didn't really study the Bible growing up. And there wasn't a large emphasis on faith and believing in things in that way. It was different. And so reading this, I don't know a lot about Joan of Arc. I now know a fair bit about Joan of Arc. And I guess I can't really bring to the table my own experience of understanding how character development and pivots can happen basically on a pin needle if a level of faith is introduced, if that makes sense. And I think that's a key thing, because halfway through the story, our Joan of Arc character changes personalities dramatically to the point where I legit thought it was going to be a plot point that she was brainwashed. I didn't think that this was a legit thing that happened, especially because typically, this wasn't a first-person book, but we were really in Misery's head for a lot of this book. And we really got a sense of why Misery responded the way they did. And then there were just huge shifts in how she responded to conflict, how they rationalized their worldview, how they made compromises, because they were always doing those things. But then even if they changed their worldview, they were also changing how their brain thought. So that was where my disconnect was. And so that character stepwise function, especially in a book where the whole point is following the journey of this character, accepting their destiny and becoming this person, I thought was so poorly executed for me that I was just incredibly frustrated. Add on to that I wasn't expecting to really love this story because Neon Young's writing style doesn't always work for me. And this was a superly dense, descriptive work that I was okay with it being challenging. I went into it wanting that. But then when we had at that 50% mark, that extreme pivot in character, I felt I had nothing to hold on to anymore. I didn't really care that much about the plot. The world is cool, but I knew it wasn't the focus and I wasn't going to get a lot of answers, which I didn't. And so then I'm supposed to try and all of a sudden get on board with essentially a new character for me. It felt like a new person that I was following. And so I would have preferred something else, but I do think if you have a different religious background, you can probably rationalize some of it more smoothly in your reading experience. Because I can kind of, being distant from the work, see it, but in the moment, I was just what is happening? And it was really jarring and really hard for me to focus on what was happening on the page, because in the back of my head, I'm but there's something wrong, but there's something wrong. I couldn't stop distracting myself because I was so thrown. I was just, didn't know what was happening. And then the last one is Boy Snowbird, which I've talked about a fair bit recently because I read it near the end of the year. This is my rare 1-star read of the year. I only give 1-star books to books that I think are poorly written in some aspect, but also harmful. And it is both of those things. Although, ironically, I think of all of my worst books in DNFs, I like the writing style of this book the most. It's that weird dichotomy of I actively really like this author's voice, but I despised the book. And that's because it chooses to have a transphobic twist ending. And I don't know why that's a trope, but it apparently is. And I need authors to stop, because if you want to incorporate elements like that, it needs to be handled with more care, research, anything. And even for people, when I talked about this previously, who didn't see it as a transphobic situation, even if we just look at it through the lens of trauma, for this ending, it's not handled with care for trauma victims either. It is just a shock value element that is tacked on needlessly. There are lots of themes of motherhood, belonging, community. It's a complicated story about boy, snow, and bird. And that story does actually come to a good resting place, I guess I would say, 30 pages from the end of the story. And up to that point, it's a pretty okay book. I mean, it doesn't discuss a lot of stuff in the nuance I would expect. Although this is a Black author, she's talking about passing in America, and she's not American, so there's a lot of stuff that, like, happens plot-wise where I'm just like, you're being really optimistic about how this Massachusetts town is going to respond to this reveal, but okay. So, like, that was fine. Like, nothing groundbreaking. It has the magical realism element of, like, there's these mirrors, and people see things in mirrors, and you don't ever really learn what the mirrors mean. And, like, that's all okay. That's all stuff I can hand-wave and be like, literary. We're just doing some art here. But then the last 30 pages make no sense. They come out of nowhere, and then we don't end in a good resting place because you're just left with this taste in your mouth about this reveal. And for me, it was so jarring. The dead naming, the misgendering that happens in these last 30 pages, and then the rationale of breaking the spell on this character. It was all pretty bad. And like I said, whether you view it as a trans character or not, the way we are handling trauma and processing how trauma would have affected this character and how they responded in the story is not... It was done, I think, very lazily, and that resulted in a very harmful ending of the book. There is not a single trans reviewer I've seen who has appreciated the ending of this book. Yeah. So, it's my 1 star. It's my 1 star. Don't like it. Don't like it. Because it's a bad ending and it's a harmful ending. It is both. Like, even if I ignore societal implications, let's say that this somehow isn't transphobic. It's a horrible ending. It's just not good. It's just not a good ending. So, that's this worst of the year and the DNFs. And that's this video. If you want to leave an emoji, I guess, there's a lot of skies and birds and stuff. So I guess leave something with wings. Anything you want with wings would be fine down in the comments. I hope you have a lovely weekend, and that if you're in the United States, we're having some winter storms, and that you are safe and you were able to get where you needed to go, because I know that's been a huge issue, at least in my personal circles and on the Discord. So I hope everyone's getting where they need to go. And if you are in the future watching this video, hi. Like if you liked it, subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.